Hello everyone and welcome to the latest episode of the Nordic Football Podcast. I'm Steve Wiss and I'm joined by Jonathan Fadugba. On this edition we're going to be talking about all the European action this week in Champions League, Europa League qualifiers, followed by an in-depth section on the Allsvenskan transfer window which has recently closed. So as I said, I'm joined by my co-host Jonathan Fadugba. How are you doing, my friend?
Very well, Steve. Happy to be introduced twice there. It's so good that you named me twice. I'm very well, and it's been an interesting night, isn't it? We're bang on it from the European games. I think the dust is just settling on the extra time in one of the games. So let's get into this European bonanza.
Yes, at the time of recording, we've just come to the end of the matches in Europe tonight, and in Europa League, that is. And I suppose that's where we're going to have to start, actually. If we look at the matches involving Allsvenskan and E13 clubs, that's the big standout result for me probably is Molde have gone through after extra time against Aris of Greece. I'll talk about that in a minute. Haugesund really battled hard to graft out a 0-0 draw away against PSV, but they do get knocked out on aggregate. AIK and Malmo, they're through, but Haugesund get knocked out. So, which of those results caught your eye the most tonight, would you say, in the Europa League?
Well, I think from a Swedish perspective, which is my domain, it's sad to see Norrköping go, losing against Hapoel Beersheva. I mean, we'll talk about all the games, I guess, in due course, but they were the only ones to fall tonight, haven't been able to make it and fall at one of the final hurdles. AIK managed to progress, and we'll talk about them shortly as well. And Malmo have made it through pretty comfortably. So we're down to two Swedish teams now for that last Europa League place.
Yeah, I think I suppose before that we better mention the Champions League, and Rosenborg did progress on Tuesday against Maribor, 6-2 on aggregate against Maribor, and I correctly predicted this outcome. Having seen Maribor in action against AIK, I was never really worried about Rosenborg in either match, to be honest. They've played very, very well in Europe this year, and two really good performances against Maribor, and the reward is a tie against Dinamo Zagreb for a place in the Champions League group stage. So I don't know if you saw any of the Rosenborg match, John, but even you must be quite impressed that they've made it this far in the Champions League qualifiers.
I did not see that. I'll leave that to you. That's the Norway area, and I think you covered that pretty well. I saw on Twitter you had a lot of comments there. How was the game?
You know what? They fell behind on the stroke of half time, which I did wonder whether they might bottle it a little bit. All they had to do was make sure they didn't concede more than 2 goals, and they were through. But they come up with a really good second half performance. As I say, Conradsen's played very well recently in Europe. Alexander Sörgård delivered goods, and it's really intriguing to me. I mean, we had a lot of questions from the listeners about my prediction for the Dinamo Zagreb tie, and I think that they're one of them teams that I initially tweeted when the draw was made, the long-term draw, that this is a favourable draw for Rosenborg because Dinamo Zagreb or Ferencvaros, but ultimately Rosenborg are underdogs in this match. Zagreb have more of a European pedigree in recent years. They've got, if you look at their page on Transfermarkt, quite a few players valued over 5 million. I think one player that is especially sought after is Olmo, a Spaniard. I don't know much about him, but he was even
Danny Olmo.
Yeah. He was linked with Premier League teams, I think, in this window.
Yeah, I've seen him for the Spain under-21s. He's an excellent player, actually. He looked really good in that tournament. Technical player, maybe a bit like Ivan Perisic or a kind of Juan Mata type, technical, like Dani Ceballos, who's just gone to Arsenal on loan. He's that sort of gifted Spanish type player. I don't know how he's ended up in that league, to be honest, playing out in Croatia. But
well, he's gonna leave that club before the end of the transfer window, I think. But Zagreb want to keep him until the end of these qualifiers because they believe, obviously, qualifying for the group stage is worth its weight in gold, isn't it? I don't know how much, maybe roughly 10 15, 20 million euros perhaps, just for making it into the group stages. So, yeah, Rosenborg are underdogs, no doubt about it. They're going to have to put in 2 very, very good performances against Zagreb. But,
Good players, yeah. I mean, who? I wanted to ask you a question, actually, about Rosenborg, which is, the lineup. There was a lot of criticism about the manager in the beginning of the season. I don't want to dwell on it too long because we have talked about him a lot. But who are the players that you would say have sort of stepped up in this resurgence for Rosenborg? They seem to have, climbed up the table quite well and quite quickly. Who are the key men? Would you say Konradsen is he a key man?
Yeah, definitely. Konradsen's done very well. Mike Jensen has really stepped up to the plate. The captain, Alexander Söderlund's scored some excellent goals recently for them in Europe, and I think a lot of the big players have just been up for the fight of late. They've kind of had a sulk early on in the season, but everyone wants to impress on the European stage, don't they? Let's be honest. If you're not up for these sort of games, then what's the point in being a football player? So it's pleasing to see. And obviously the manager, I gave him a lot of criticism early in the season. He still doesn't fully convince me, but behind the scenes, he must have had some very good man management skills to get these players back in a better head place. Their mental state is a lot better right now. So I'll give him plenty of credit for that.
Well, I've just realised that Anders Konradsen, is actually 29 years old now, which I'm stunned at because I remember back in the day with you, Steve, being an analyst on the French league, and he was a young player at that point at Rennes, Stade Rennais. I'm absolutely shocked that he's 29, to be honest, and I guess that shows that maybe we're getting on a bit in years. Time is flying, isn't it?
Yeah. How old do you think Daniel Bratton is now? I
saw him actually in a game the other day. I tuned into a Norwegian game and he was playing, and he's gone bold now, hasn't he? I couldn't believe it. I mean, that sums it up, to be honest. I don't need to really answer that question. He lost all his hair.
He's knocking on the door of 40, I think. I don't know exactly. I think 38, maybe 39. But, another one back from our days working together. So, Rosenborg, well done to them. And I'm looking forward to the Dinamo Zagreb tie. My prediction for the tie is for Zagreb to prevail just.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you 100% on your comment there about the importance of Dani Olmo. And I think it's a shrewd business decision from Dinamo Zagreb. And I think it's a business decision that takes me on to my next club that we should maybe discuss. And that is Norrköping. The reason, I want to talk about them following on from this is because of they've gone in a completely opposite direction to Zagreb, haven't they, in trying to keep hold of their players, the Croatian outfit, to qualify for the lucrative group stages. Norrköping cashed in on their star asset, Jordan Larsson, and it's cost them, hasn't it, in this game tonight? And they've gone out against Beersheva, as we mentioned.
Yeah, and this for me is a disappointment from a neutral point of view. No disrespect to the Israeli league or Beersheva, but they're the sort of team they should be beating. They should have set themselves up for a tie against Feyenoord in the last round of the Europa League qualifying. Okay, that would not have been an easy game, but they should be in that position. 3-1 on the night, the second leg, 1-1 on the first leg. Is that where it cost them, do you think, John, the first leg? And what went wrong for them in Israel?
Well, that's the thing. That is really what has cost them the first leg. They missed a host of chances in that game, and that was around the time when Jordan Larsson had just left. To be honest, it was all breaking. At that point, they had to rejig their lineup. Obviously, they've got new signing Mike Semmer, who we will talk about. He scored. We'll talk about all the Swedish transfers in part 2 of this podcast. Complete rundown as the window is now closed. But yeah, he played up front with Niemann and Haksabanovic in a kind of a 3-4-3 that they tend to set up with. But it was really a game of chances missed. And, as you've mentioned there, it's cost them. And I just wondered, when looking at that game, how costly was it not having the man himself there, Henrik Larsson's son, in that game? I mean, he would surely have taken some of the chances, in that match, I feel. And ultimately, I believe that's what really cost them. I mean, tonight they were it was really a case. I mean, they weren't as good. Sorry, I mean in this game in Israel. I think they were doing a little bit of a discredit to the team Hapoel Beersheva, to be fair, because they came third in the Israeli league last season, and I know the level's not amazing, but I think it's actually a little bit better than people give it credit for at times. I think they produce some good players out there. They tend to get a lot of African imports and players from those kind of leagues as well who develop and maybe move on. But tonight it was a case of they were kind of dominated, really. They did get back into it late, but it was 2-0. They got one goal back to make it 2-1, but ultimately it was too late, and then the Israeli team topped it off with a third goal late on. So, yeah, it's all over for Norrköping, and they are out. And it just says to me, as I mentioned, should Scandinavian teams be really making better business decisions to keep players? If they'd have kept him for 3 or 4 more weeks, Jordan Larsson, they might find themselves in the Europa League group stages, which is worth millions. That could counterbalance the sort of 3 or 4 million euros they got for him in the first place. Something to think about, really, because I don't tend to see that kind of logical thinking that Dinamo Zagreb, as you mentioned, there tend to have. Yeah.
To be fair, Israel is a tough place to go, actually. The fans, it's a bit of a bear pit, isn't it, out there sometimes? I remember watching Strasbourg were there in the last round against someone, and they found themselves in a bit of trouble, so managed to come through in the end. But an Israeli test actually awaits Malmo now. They're facing a side called Yehuda, who I've genuinely never heard of them, so I don't really know whether they're an up-and-coming team or whether they did well in the cup or something out there in Israel. I don't know, but Malmo are through after an aggregate win against Zhirinsky. There were no real alarms in this tie for them, were there, John? And would you expect them now to qualify for the group stage?
Malmo, I would expect them to qualify. Yeah, I think they're a strong outfit. Won the first leg comfortably 3-0 against the Mostar club. Pretty straightforward win. Took the lead in the first half, Rasmus Bengtsson, and then a goal from Anders Christensen, who's such a key man for them, and Søren Rieks. And they were able to kind of rotate a little bit in the team for this game. And ultimately they've gone through quite comfortably. I'm not entirely sure who they're playing in the next game.
Yeah. You mentioned Yehuda from Israel.
Yeah, I don't know much about that team, but I'll be honest with you. But they lost this game. They lost 1-0. So they've taken their off a little bit. I mean, Jonas Knudsen came in for one of his first games. But yeah, it's a bit of a disappointment to lose. But I think they'll be worried as well by injury to Marcos Antonsen, who went off. Yeah. But we shall see, how they get on.
And the final Swedish team, AIK, they're through 3-2 aggregate win against Sheriff Tiraspol. Could only draw 1-1 in the second leg at home against them, and it got very nervous, I think, from what I was reading. But they are through, and somewhat unfortunately, they are now going to face Celtic for a place in the Champions League, Europa League group stage. Bit of an unfortunate draw for them. If they'd much rather have faced Cluj, I'm sure. But it just seems that the Scandinavian teams cannot avoid Celtic, can they, in Europe these days?
Well, yes, we now finally have the answer to the, we now know who shot the sheriff, as Bob Marley once sang, and it was Nabil Bahoui. He's gunned down the sheriff, and his goal has been enough in this game. It was a 1-1 draw, and an aggregate 3-2 win. So Nabil Bahoui came on and got his goal. He's doing really well, actually, since he's rejoined the club. We'll talk about him again in the transfers section later on. But got a key goal, really, because Sheriff actually scored in the 86th minute, and it looked like if they just got one more in that last 5 minutes, they would have gone through. So AIK would have been out, and that would have been a disaster for the club, really. So they managed to hang on, and as I said, Bahoui shot the Sheriff, and they now progress to a massive game, really, against Celtic. I want to touch on one thing, which is the atmosphere at the club and the protests, actually.
At AIK?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of issues, and this has been a theme in Sweden for a good part of the season now. The attendance for this game was very low. And part of the reason was they shut certain parts of the ground. And the reason for this is because there's an ongoing dispute between the fans and police, Swedish police, about tifos and displays, things like flares. And it's really sort of kicked off this season, and it's escalated. There's been a lot of fan protests, and fans are really not happy about it. And there's been boycotts of games, and AOK was one of them, because of this, this ongoing issue with police trying to really clamp down on fan support. And I think it's a massive shame, to be honest. I understand the safety element, and obviously safety is paramount for the spectators, but I really think it takes away and detracts from the atmosphere in Sweden to not allow these fans to display, their tifos and their flares and things like that. It makes the league, it adds a lot of flavour to the league, which I think is a massive shame if they are to lose that. Attendances in Sweden and Norway and in Scandinavia in general aren't incredible, but what you do get is those fans that do attend are very, very passionate. And I think, just trying to restrict what they can and can't do in the stadium. There's so many amazing displays that you get of fans before games, especially, the Stockholm teams do really well. Gothenburg teams do really well. There's a lot of really passionate fan bases out there. And yeah, they closed their North Stand ahead of this game because of the police. And I just think that's a massive shame, to be honest. And I hope they get the opportunity to have a full house against Celtic, because that really, really will be a huge game.
Yeah, and on Twitter we had a question from Ryan McAteer. Is he related to Jason at all? I don't know. But he asked you, how do you think AIK would fare against Celtic? And what sort of a threat can they pose to Celtic?
Well, that's a very good question. And, well, I think what they will pose, it was a bit of a disaster for Celtic, wasn't it, to lose to Cluj? One of my favourite ever banners at Manchester United was when they played Cluj in the Champions League many, many years ago, and there was a fan flag in the crowd which said knee deep in Cluj. So yeah, that was a nice play on words which I enjoyed and I remember to this day. But Cluj knocked them out, and Celtic now will have to take on that challenge in the Europa League. It will not be easy for them by any means, because I think with Celtic under Neil Lennon, from what I know, they're not quite as solid as they were in the past. I think they kind of straddle between being really on the front foot at times, or maybe being a little bit more conservative than Brendan Rodgers' side was. I could be wrong on that, but that's how I've seen it from a distance, maybe. What they will face in AIK is a very solid unit, a team that won the league with conceding the fewest amount of goals last season. They conceded hardly any goals in their 30-game campaign, less than 0.5 per game on average, which sums up how solid they were. They based their game on defence. They based their game on solidity under their manager, the quirky Rikard Norling. AIK have lost a few players in recent weeks as well, and months, because of the transfer window. Daniel Sundgren, who played against Molde tonight, he's obviously left the club now. He's gone to Aris, and they've lost others, but they've made some replacements. As I mentioned, Bahoui he could potentially be a key player. He looks like he's getting more and more importance in that team. Players that maybe to look out for Mr. McAteer there, maybe Sebastian Larsson, who was formerly of Arsenal and Sunderland, he might remember, is one in the midfield, getting on a bit in years, but still can dictate the play at times, takes set pieces, good free kick taker as always. And they've got a couple of good sort of lively strikers. They have options there now. Henrik Goitom, Tarek El Yanusi, Chinadu Abassi. So, physically, they're quite robust up front. They can offer the defenders a strong physical threat. So, yeah, what you can expect, I think, is probably two tight games. I think AIK will look to kind of sit back and maybe counter-attack and try and keep the scoreline very, very tight. I think Celtic are at home first. So I can imagine them doing that and then maybe trying to take them back to Stockholm and grind out the job. So, yeah, it will not be easy by any means for either team, really. I would put Celtic as slight favourites. But, yes, it will be a very open and I think a very good game.
Interesting stuff. And just before we move on to Molde in Europe, Torleif Oyen asked a good question to us here. Besides transfers, am I right in assuming Rosenborg will now be the first Scandinavian team to play with VAR in the CL playoff. Neither league has it, but have any Swedes been there already? And he also asked to rate their chances and if they'll keep Berger Melling. Just on Berger Melling, I know Rosenborg rejected an offer from LAFC for him, so I'd imagine they'll keep him. I don't think they want to offload Melling. In terms of VAR, I'll be honest, I didn't know VAR was going to be in the CL playoff round. I presume it is going to be, so it'll be interesting to see how it sets up there in the Lerkendal Stadion. I suppose at this stage, when a match is worth 10 million or whatever, then they need VAR in place, John, don't they, these days?
Yeah, indeed. I agree with that. It's a good question, actually, and I'm really enjoying the questions that Mr. Owen is putting up of late. Every week he seems to come up with a really good one. I remember one about the Royal League, which we covered on another show, and don't forget, you can dig into our archives and obviously subscribe to us on iTunes or Spotify. And follow us at Nordic Foot Pod if you want to ask a question, because it's always good when we get those listener questions. And also, if you do enjoy the show, then give us a little rating, because sometimes that can help bump us up the list. But yeah, VAR, well, we had the Super Cup last night, so the less talked about that, the better, with penalties and how things are regulated. But Steve, let's move on to the Norwegian games. Which other games stood out for you tonight?
Well, both stood out because Molde had a 3-0 advantage from the first leg. And I'll be honest, I didn't even bother watching the first half, because it's one of those, you just expect them to get the job done, don't you? But I suddenly saw the scoreline, 2-0 at half-time. I'm like, bloody hell, they're going to bottle this, aren't they? And you know what, Aris, it was a really tough environment to play in. Full respect to the Greek fans, they just make life very difficult for any opposition, don't they? It's like a real bear pit out there. It's really intimidating. And Aris got the third goal in the second half. And I tell you what, they laid absolute siege to the Molde goal in the last 5-10 minutes. It could easily have ended 4-0 in regulation, but there was a couple of good saves from the goalkeeper. And then in extra time, Molde managed to get a goal from Bolly, someone who's, I think he's hardly even scored for them this year. He came off the bench, the quick attacker, and got that away goal. And as soon as you get an away goal, of course, in extra time, then it's pretty much the end of the tie, isn't it? I've mentioned this before. It's a load of absolute bollocks. But on this occasion, it worked for Molde, didn't it? Getting that away goal. They go through on aggregate 4-3. I'm forgetting who they're playing the next round, but really nervous for them there. And I was surprised that they in the second leg that they struggled so much. Yeah,
and in the other game, what caught your eye there? What was the main talking points?
Well, PSV won the first leg in Haugesund 1-0. I was expecting the Dutch side to absolutely batter them tonight, to be brutally honest. But Haugesund ground out a 0-0. And you know what? They were a threat in the second half. They could easily have scored. They hit the post with about 5 minutes left. Had a couple of other good chances. They could easily have taken it to extra time, which would have been sensational, wouldn't it? I mean, PSV were, the bookmakers 1-5 favourites tonight, even shorter. I thought they were absolutely crap. I mean, this is a team that finished, level on points with Ajax last year in the Dutch league. They should be absolutely hammering them over 2 legs here. I was not impressed with PSV Eindhoven at all, John. And I don't want to take anything away from Haugesund, but they really should be totally outclassing a side like Haugesund. I suspect it's maybe a bit of a depression after being knocked out of the Champions League round against Bâle. But, full respect to Haugesund. They've given an absolute best shot here. They've left everything out on the field. And on another day, they might have taken them to extra time, and who knows what could have happened then. Great run for them in Europe. They took it very seriously. Really great to see a side embrace, Europa League qualifying from a team like Haugesund. And it's just a shame for them they couldn't progress to the next round. I don't think anyone gave them a prayer in this tie, but they've come very close to upsetting the odds. So unlucky.
Yeah, massive respect to Haugesund. I think they really deserve credit. You see a lot of teams sort of treat Europa League or European games at times with a blasé attitude, and I must say they've been a breath of fresh air, I think, Haugesund. I know that my man Bruno Leitze, who I'm a fan of, hit the post as well, I understand. PSV are managed by Mark van Bommel, by the way, which is another blast in the past, isn't it, really, when you think about it? Him, such a sort of solid midfielder in the sort of 2000s. It doesn't sound like he's doing too well. They're scraping past the sort of, considered minnows, really, weren't they, Haugesund, in this game? So you just sum up Haugesund's campaign, in a quick 20 seconds, maybe 30 seconds. What was the highlights, players? Is there anyone who maybe might come out of this team now and progress even further? Sometimes it can be a real kickstarter for players' careers, can't it? And push them on to bigger things. What's the overview of Haugesund, or even the manager? Surely he will get some attention for the way he's led them on this journey.
Well, they've not had the full players available. They've had a lot of injuries and suspensions around, but two players have stood out as being ones to watch out in the future. Christopher Velder, just a 19-year-old, and he can play sort of on either wing. He's caught the eye recently in League and Europe. And also Kevin Krygard, who scored the goal that got them to this round. He scored that goal against Sturm Graz away from home, which enabled them to face PSV, another 19-year-old youngster. And these guys wouldn't have been in the team if it weren't for the injuries that they suffered. So, for them two guys to go out on the European stage and really catch the eye, hopefully they could develop, and they could be two lads to watch out for in the Elite Serie in the next 2 or 3 years to come. But, the manager, Jostein, has done a good job here by keeping things simple. They're a very tight-knit squad, and I would expect them, hopefully, to finish about sort of mid-table this year, and the Europa League run, without doubt, will be the highlight of their season.
Yeah, fantastic stuff to the Haug. Big respect. I'm all for the teams taking it seriously and giving it a good go. And they've given not only Sturm Graz a bloody nose, but also given PSV some serious worries there. Such a low aggregate score. Before we move on from European football and on to domestic matters, we're going to talk about the Swedish transfer window, which has just shut. Let me run you through a few stats just for those who want a bit of context on the Europa League and what the importance it will be. Steve, I think you're going to run through the upcoming fixtures before we move on. But let me just give some context before you do that. This is just from the UEFA, guidelines in terms of finances available, and the importance of this for Scandinavian teams, really. Each of the 48 clubs that qualify for the Europa League group stage can expect to receive a group stage allocation of 2.92 million euros, split into a down payment of 2.75 million and a balance payment of 170,000 euros. That's the starting fees. Then, for group stage performances, bonuses would be paid for each match, 570,000 euros per win and 190,000 euros per draw. So if you look at that, we just talked about Norrköping and selling Jordan Larsson. If they kept him for 2 extra games and got through, 4 extra games, let's say, they could have been looking at an extra, 4 million or so. All right, you can argue maybe they might not fancy their chances of getting through, but it just shows you that the Europa League does have a huge pot of money there available to Scandinavian teams if they can get it, and that could really reshape the league, in my opinion. If you get a team, like a Molde, maybe not so much a Molde, but maybe a lower team like a Haugesund or a Norrköping into those group stages, you're really getting the ammunition to maybe take on your league in the future, I believe, and challenge teams like Malmö. So, yeah, it's just a few stats there for you. The Europa League winners can expect to pick up £4 million, by the way, in €4 million in bonuses just for winning it as an extra bonus. But and interestingly as well, just before we move on, Steve, I want you to run through the fixtures if you can. If you compare that to the Champions League, it's not even a comparison. We mentioned you get 2.92 million for participating in the group stages. You get 2.7 million euros just for winning one game in the Champions League. And every single team that makes that group stage in the Champions League gets 15.25 million just for being in it. So, that tells you what Celtic have lost out on, and that's why they'll be pretty gutted. But, who knows if Rosenborg can get it, and if they do, that's what awaits them.
Yeah, Rosenborg against Dinamo Zagreb for, 15 million, you said, which... I suppose from neutral supporters of Norwegian football, they probably wouldn't want to see Rosenborg get through, would they? Because it would mean probably more years of dominance in the future from the windfall from that. But nevertheless, it's a 15 million game. In the Europa League, we've got AIK against Celtic. We've got Molde are facing Partizan Belgrade, which is an interesting match, isn't it? That feels like quite a 50-50 sort of tie to me, that one. Malmo are facing I've lost them.
Israeli
side, yeah. Israeli side. Yehuda.
And that's that.
Yeah, that is it. That is the remaining. Of the other sides in Scandinavia left in Europe, I think... did FC Copenhagen get knocked out last night of the Champions League? I don't know. HJK Helsinki are out of Europa League now, unfortunately. They were the last Finnish involvement, and I think Brøndby got knocked out as well. So that's the end of Finland, and anyone in Iceland and Faroe Islands got knocked out quite a long time ago. So, that's the future, and big couple of weeks coming of European qualifiers.
Fantastic stuff, Steve.
Okay, right, we'll take a break right now, and after the interval, we're going to be talking in depth about the Allsvenskan transfer window. So see you again very soon. Welcome back to the Nordic Football Podcast. In this section, we're going to be talking about the Allsvenskan transfer window, which has recently just closed. All business, certainly into clubs, has all been done now over there in Sweden. So we're going to have a look in depth at what certain teams in particular have done during this window. Overall, John, what are your feelings towards the transfer period in the Allsvenskan?
Deadline day is here in Sweden. It's been and gone. The transfer window is now closed for the rest of the 2019 season. And there's been quite a lot of activity. I've got my yellow tie on. We've had 67 departures from the league. And we are ready to talk about not every single one of them, but quite a lot of them.
The clock is ticking, and it's, as I say, expired now, the Swedish transfer window. So let's talk about some of the big moves. And the most expensive fee received by any club in this window so far, I may add that teams could still lose players before the main European window closes. But Norrköping received 4 million euros, roughly 4 million euros for Jordan Larsson, who went to Spartak Moscow. And we have talked about that transfer before. But in terms of Norrköping themselves, they signed a couple of players. Mike Seema from GIF Sundsvall on a free transfer, and Christopher Tello has returned to the club again after a spell at Molde. So in terms of Norrköping, John, they lose a big player, they gain a couple. How do you think they're doing?
Obviously they're the place to start because they've had one of the biggest transfers of the window, being Jordan Larsson, who's now since made his debut for Spartak Moscow. Looks to have gotten a team there, so good luck to him. And his departure will be felt, I think, by Norrköping, but it will also allow them an opportunity to maybe redevelop and sort of go in a different direction with their squad. I've noted in recent games that the likes of Sead Haksabanovic is getting opportunities. He wasn't able to really establish himself at the time. So he's seeing a few more chances. And it shouldn't be forgotten that Norrköping still have quite a lot of strikers. I think that was one of the reasons they decided to take that bid from Spartak Moscow, because they've got the likes of Christopher Niemann still. They've got Simon Skrab, who can play up there, Kalle Holmberg still. So they do have quite a few options in that attacking, in those forward positions. And obviously they've also taken the opportunity to bring in Mike Seema, as you've mentioned. And I think it's a pretty good pickup from GIF Sundsvall. And in fact, he repaid them almost pretty much instantly with a goal in the Europa League qualifying first leg against Hapoel Beersheva in a 1-1 draw. So, yeah, they've done some business there, and they'll be one to look at and keep an eye on.
All right, so that was Norrköping. If we move to Malmö now, and they have. Let's talk about the departures first. They've lost Andreas Windheim to Sparta Prague for 1.3 million euros. They've loaned 3 players out as well. A couple to fellow Allsvenskan teams: Samuel Adrian to Kalmar and Pavle Vagic to AFC Eskilstuna. Coming in at Malmö is Felix Beijmo, a right back from Werder Bremen, and Jonas Knudsen, left back from Ipswich Town. So I'm not familiar with those 2 names, John. I don't know what you know about them, but you think Malmö have not had a bad window here so far?
Well, I kind of judge Malmö more on who they've. In fact, to be honest, I judge the entire league really on who they've lost rather than who they've gained. I think in most cases in Sweden, it's a case of can you hold on to your players, and the ones who sort of lose their players at this time of the season, especially key players, it can always hold them back a little bit. But at the same time, Malmö, I think when I look at them, they haven't really gained anyone I would say who's going to be pivotal to their title race or their title challenge. But in Jonas Knudsen, they got a very solid player, Danish international from Ipswich Town, who's very experienced and I think at this level can do a job. He's not going to win them the title, but he'll certainly be solid for them. Defensively, plays on the left or can play as a centre back, left-sided centre back. So he's an option. They also have, as you've mentioned, Felix Beijmo, who has come back from Djurgården. He was a player who was exceptionally highly rated about a year or so ago, and earned himself a move to Werder Bremen. But it didn't work out at all for him really there, and he's had limited playing time, and he's back in Sweden. So he's come back, but instead of moving back to Djurgården, as many would have maybe imagined, he's gone to their rivals Malmö, which caused a little bit of a stir, but it was explained by Djurgården's sporting director. Just said simply, I think he's a fantastic person, the 21-year-old, but at the end of the day, we didn't have any space for him in our team. Obviously, they've got Aslak Witry now and other players in that squad there at Djurgården doing so well. And Malmö took the opportunity really to loan him and bring him in. Don't forget, this is a player that cost around 3 million euros roughly when he went to Bremen. But he's not seeing any game time and he's back.
Yeah, was the fullback positions an area where they needed to reinforce, do you think, Malmö?
Possibly. I mean, they've got options there. It's not like they're really struggling. I do think Malmö have got a good squad. So, I wouldn't say that they're kind of in urgent need. I think it's just back, solidifying their squad with Europe as well to contend with. They want the biggest squad possible. And obviously Malmö have money. They're in a position to be able to strengthen when needed and strengthen from a position of strength as well, not just, when they're desperate. So, he will compete in that right back position. Erik Larsson has obviously played there at times, but he's played also in midfield on occasions. It depends obviously also what kind of system Malmö tend to play. At times they've been playing a sort of 3-5-2 with the likes of Søren Rieks and Jørgen Birgit in the wide position. So, it'll be an interesting one to see. But yeah, I think they probably could use a right back, and Beijmo is a very, very good one to bring in.
Okay, well, let's have a look at the 2 teams at the top of the table right now. And that's Djurgården and AIK. AIK lost Daniel Sundgren to Aris in Greece. We've talked about his loss before. Nabil Bahoui is confirmed as a free transfer now from the Graafschap, and they signed Felix Michel from AFC Eskilstuna. Briefly, AIK, they lost one key player, but for the most part, the squad is still intact, isn't it? Indeed,
yeah. You mentioned there Nabil Bahoui, didn't you?
Yes.
Yes, and he's got off the mark pretty well. He scored 2 goals in their recent win at AFC Eskilstuna. One of them was a very solid goal. And yeah, he will come in and look to just give them that push. I think they need it. I think they need a bit of creativity and oomph. Obviously second in the table, doing very well actually. I think they've kind of gone under the radar a little bit because of so much focus on Djurgården maybe, and also Malmö and Hammarby, who have done so well offensively. But AIK have not gone away at all. They're the champions. They're 1 point behind, obviously, Djurgården at this moment in time, a Stockholm battle as it stands. And I think he will be a good signing for them. Obviously, he's come back from the Dutch league. He has a history at AIK and is an experienced player. So I think a lot of fans were happy to see him actually as well.
And as we move across town to Djurgården, they have signed an interesting player from Fortuna Düsseldorf, Emir Kujovic, a striker. They've also got hold of Curtis Edwards from Östersunds. And I do believe Edwards actually scored for them at the weekend at Djurgården. In terms of departures, they've not really lost anyone. It's seemingly of note. Milali Mayambila, the right winger, has moved to Portuguese club Farense for 100,000 euros. I don't know how important he was to the club. A couple of guys have gone out on loan, but in terms of additions, Kujovic and Edwards, how important are they going to be for Djurgården, do you think?
It's another one where I look at them and I think it's the business they haven't done that I think could be pivotal to the title race in general. They've kept who I believe one of the best defenders in the league in Marcus Danielsson. There wasn't a huge amount of rumours around him, to be fair, but they've kept him anyway. There was a lot of rumours about a midfield player, Jesper Karlstrom, with rumours that he would be going to Germany, among other touted locations, but he's stuck around. They did need, I think, a striker because Buya Toure, good player, but he's on an outgoing contract, and there was some, question marks over whether he can carry them for the rest of the season. Edward Chilufya is a bit young, obviously a 19-year-old, and Viberg as well. So an experienced signing in Kujovic, 31 years old, Fortuna Düsseldorf, really, really well received his signing. There were other clubs in Sweden who were in for him, so that looks like a good pickup. I'm not entirely sure about him. I'll be honest, I don't know a great deal about the player, so I won't pretend to sort of know much about him. What I do know is he has honours to his name in the past. He has won the league title before with Norrköping in 2015. So, he was also their top scorer at the time. So, he's also got an Allsvenskan top scorer name to his belt in 2015 season. So, certainly comes with a pedigree. And if he can continue that, he's 31 now, so maybe getting on a little bit. But if he can come back from Dusseldorf, brush down those cobwebs, and fire Djurgården to another title, he will go down in legendary status in DIF territory.
I know, it sounds awful now, doesn't it, to say at 31 you're getting on a bit. I always used to laugh when I was a bit younger, but now I'm in my 30s myself. Then, in football, in terms, I wouldn't be considered a spring chicken anymore, for sure.
You wouldn't be getting more than 60 minutes a game, Steve. Tops.
Unless I was in goal. I could last there. I used to be a goalkeeper back in my youth days. I used to be a goalkeeper in my youth days.
Well, it's prime years for that now. It's the early 30s.
I know. I just never kept up with it. But staying in Stockholm, and Hammarby, well, they sold Odilon Kusunu to Club Brugge for 2.8 million euros, which is a pretty good price. They also sold Sander Svensson to Odense in Denmark. He didn't even play for them this year. He was on loan at Odd Ball Club in Norway. So that's quite good, I think, to get 250,000 euros for a player who wasn't even featuring for you. I know you were talking in the recent podcasts about potentially them losing players like Tankovic, and that still might happen, I suppose. But it's encouraging in this particular window that they haven't lost anyone. They suppose they can afford to keep players now. Nearly 3 million euros income in this transfer window for Hammarby. So they don't necessarily need to sell, perhaps. In terms of players that have arrived to the club, they've signed Richard Magyar, centre-back from Greuther Fürth in Germany. And another Werder Bremen player joins the league, Aaron Johansson, centre-forward. Decent market value. So, as always with Hammarby, plenty of seemingly ins and outs. But how do you assess their situation?
Well, I think I say this every window really when it comes to Hammarby, business unknown, to be decided. I mean, they've also brought 2 players in from Ivory Coast, from ASEC Mimosas, the famous club out there. It's always Aaron Johansson. Will he do well? Obviously, Kjart Hansen's left, and he would probably come in and replace him. I know there was a lot of fanfare about the player when he joined. Magyar as well. I do think they needed a centre-back maybe just to try and solidify that defence a little bit. I think they could use some tightening in that area. Johansson's another player who does come with a bit of pedigree, obviously an American forward, international player. There's another player I honestly can't say too much about in terms of what I know about him because I haven't seen him play that much. But obviously he does have some pedigree from the German league. Also at AZ Alkmaar, he scored 38 goals in 84 games in total. So, he's done it in Denmark. He didn't score that many in the Bundesliga, 4 in 28 in total. But certainly in Denmark and the Dutch league, he's been quite good. So, the challenge is there for him now. He's had a lot of injury problems this season. Ankle problems kept him out of the league for most of this season, actually, last season. So can he overcome that? We'll see. Do Hammarby even really need him? I mean, they're absolutely flying in terms of goals at the moment, and they tend to have that balance very, very well. So, do too many cooks spoil the broth, Steve? I guess we will find out.
I'm guessing he's the replacement for Kjartansson, though, isn't he? I mean, just looking at Johansson now, actually, he once had a market value of nearly 5 million. I mean, this is a guy who's had 19 caps for the United States of America. Could be a potentially brilliant signing if he stays fit there for Hammarby. It must be said. That one definitely does catch my eye.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like I say, I think when he joined, there was a lot of talk about him. Obviously, he's come back from 3 months out with ankle surgery, which is a problem, and he's 28 now. But there was a lot of fanfare, like you've mentioned. Obviously, American fans are very passionate about their players as well, which caused a stir. So they've got a lot of attention in the States, Hammarby at the moment. But yeah, I think it's one of those ones where if he can settle in, he can also play on the wing as well. So he's quite versatile. Has a bit of a good pedigree. I think maybe we need a listener who maybe has watched him to maybe tweet us at Nordic Football and let us know if you think it's a good signing or not, to be honest, because I'm a little bit on the fence with it. I was similar with Kjartansson, but Kjartansson had a proven track record in Sweden. He'd already scored goals for other clubs, whereas Johansson is new to the league. But at 28, he could be maybe that final piece in the jigsaw to push them even further up the table and score more goals. Particularly if you bear in mind that Tankovic, or one of the players who's doing so well at the moment in that forward area, maybe is it a sign that they might be departing before the window closes around Europe?
I'm guessing you worry is if he turns into an Andy Carroll or a Danny Welbeck or a Daniel Sturridge, got ability, but there's no point, is there, if you're not on the actual field of play? So fitness will be a big part there for Johansson, but we wish him well from the Nordic Football Podcast. Let's move on to another team, Östersunds, and let's just have a list of who've left them first. Ravel Morrison obviously was one, but he hardly featured anyway. Alhaji Giero has moved to Helsingborg. Curtis Edwards to Djurgården. Hossam Aish, who I do believe was a key player for Östersund, has moved to IFK Göteborg. And coming in, they've got players I've never heard of, to be honest. A couple of lads from, the English lower leagues. I don't know quite how low. Alex Perver from Guiseley. They're in my neck of the wood, Guiseley. Blair Turgett, right winger from Maidstone. Nebiyu Perry, left winger from FC Köln in Germany. And Jordan Attar Kadiri, a centre forward from Nasarawa United in Nigeria. So, you were a bit of a non-league expert in the UK, John. So I don't know if you've heard of Perver or Turgott, but be interesting to see how they get on.
Yep, I'm very familiar with Blair Turgott. He plays in the South. Obviously, Maidstone being based in the South and the National League as well level. Former West Ham United Academy graduate. He's been around the league. I think he played for Stevenage for a time, Boreham Wood as well, I think. Very familiar with him as a player. I think it's a good move for him, certainly, because he'd come off the back of a season where he was captain of Maidstone, and he did very well for a while before picking up a fairly long-term injury, which kept him out for several months. So for him to be moving out to Sweden, I think is a really good move for him, because Maidstone were relegated. So yeah, he's gone from I think level 7 of English football to top division in Sweden there. Great opportunity. Alex Perver, I'm not so familiar with because he's in your neck of the woods up north. I don't cover the National League North that much because it's quite far away. So I did watch him in his debut though against Norrköping in that game where they were absolutely battered by Norrköping, and he did struggle in that game. I'll be honest, he looked out of place, and maybe it's one of those ones where when you join the league for the first time, you think everything's new for you, isn't it? Really, it's a completely new experience, and you need to get up to the pace of the game. Was he maybe thrown in a little bit too early? Is a question mark. But I think this transfer window really is kind of the end of the era for Graham Potter and his Östersunds team, in my opinion. I think this can really be considered like the washing out of that squad now. If you look at it, there's all the players that you kind of tended to associate with that Potter team towards the end of their fantastic time there with the Europa League run. More and more of them are on their way out now. Aish, of course, who was a key player for them over the past few years. Curtis Edwards, who just so symbolic from their rise, coming from the lower divisions up to the top division, him moving on to Djurgården for a new challenge. Giro as well, he was very, very instrumental at times. I remember in the cup runs and things like that. So yeah, this is really like the washing out of that team, I think. And Ian Birchall was putting his stamp on things now. A lot of those players have come to the end of their time with Östersunds as well. Birchall came out and said that everybody at the club knew that Aish wanted to leave since January, which was a bit of a parting shot in some ways. A bit of an accusation there maybe that he didn't have his heart fully in it this season, and I think that's a fair accusation in terms of his output on the pitch, because I don't think he's been anywhere near as good as he was last season, for example. But yeah, players like that who have been such stalwarts of the team, and don't forget the likes of Samat Ghoddos who have left. It really is kind of coming to the end of an era now. Östersunds lack goals. They have the lowest expected goals in the league. So the signing of a forward from Nigeria, I think he's been on trial there and is impressed. He's a 19-year-old, so this is completely new to him going out to the middle of wintry Sweden. It's it will be very interesting to see how they do, and I think it's quite a fascinating window really. But can the non-league players handle it out there in Sweden? We shall see.
Yeah, we certainly shall see. And we just talked about Hussam Aish there. He's moved to IFK Göteborg. I mean, is that a bigger? I mean, they obviously are a bigger club, aren't they? But are they necessarily a better club to be at? I don't know. Whether it will be a good personal move for Aish or whether he would have been better off moving away from the league. But we moved to IFK now. They've also signed Tobias Sana, a left winger from Aarhus in Denmark. They've lost, obviously, Benjamin Nygren to Genk, but they did get 3.7 million euros for him, which is quite a good fee. They also lost Carl Starfelt, centre-back, to Rubin Kazan. Can't remember him ever being mentioned too much on the Nordic Football Podcast, John, so I don't know how important he was at the back for IFK. But as I say, will he be a big loss or not?
Reasonably a big loss. I don't think he was a key player. He was an important first team starter for them. So, from that point of view, you don't want to be losing your main players. And I think IFK have wobbled really since they've lost Benjamin Nygren. I think they lost a lot of momentum around those departures. Starfelt as well. I think that's kind of they've tailored off a little bit in the title race. Remember, we were talking about them, 6, 7, 8 games ago as potential title contenders. I remember one particular commenter on Twitter who was adamant they would be, maybe potential champions. I wasn't convinced at the time, and I think, that's kind of proved itself. But yeah, let's not forget that they were considered really highly, and they've just sort of tailored off a little bit now, dropped down the table slightly. these two signings, I think, are very, very. Well, I think they're intriguing. Also Maisha, I really didn't expect them to get him. There was big rumours he'd go to like Middlesbrough, the Championship anyway. Nottingham Forest were in for him apparently. Leeds scouted him, and that I think personally alludes to what I just said about his level of dip from last season. You've got all these big clubs coming to watch you, and you've ended up still in Allsvenskan. Really, I think that says a little bit about how he didn't have a great season so far this season, and maybe that's cost him a major move. But having said that, I think EFK is a positive move for him. It's a fresh start. He is, I think, EFK fan. He mentioned in his unveiling that he used to watch EFK as a child, and he wants to emulate some of the great names that have been there. So he seems really, really motivated. He said that's the only team he would have joined in Sweden apart from Östersund. So I think it's a fresh start for him and an opportunity, maybe a slightly better supported club. EFK, although they've been below Östersund in recent years, they're a bigger club than them, and a bigger platform and a bigger fan base. So it's an opportunity there for him to sort of refresh. Tobias Sonner, there's a backstory there. Obviously, he's previously come through at EFK. He was there a few years back when I was out living there. Really, really didn't go well for him at the end of his time in EFK after he threw a corner flag actually into the crowd at a game after he was booed, and it really ended badly for him at EFK. So a lot of the fans were not happy to see him back. It caused a big stir, his return. But he's not really done too much out in Denmark, and I think he's returned home really maybe wanting to sort of prove himself again. But I think he will have to hit the ground running because fans were not happy with him in his general conduct. So decent player on his day, winger, can cut inside, he can score goals, but I think he lacks a little bit of stardust. I'm not a massive fan of his, so I was quite surprised with that move. But I think they needed numbers really after losing Nygren. And one thing to just point out before we move on that is I really want to wish Rasmus Wikström a speedy recovery. He's an academy graduate who came through and he made his debut in the recent game against Falkenberg, and he did his cruciate ligament after 20 minutes, roughly. So he's out for 10 months, which is really, really sad, isn't it? He's someone coming through as a teenager, making a debut at your hometown club. That was really, really sad to see. So I wish him well. I hope he can really recover because he's a very, very promising defender, actually. I've seen him play for the youth teams and he's got real potential.
Yeah, it's a real shame, isn't it? I mean, at least a lot of those months will be in the off-season. So he hopefully can come back and get a decent amount of game time in 2020. So yeah, we wish him well from the Nordic Football Podcast there. And now, just looking up and down the list here of transfers in and out of clubs, and I mean, some are not very active at all. Falkenberg, for example, hardly any business in or out. Sirius as well, not much activity. But on the other end of the spectrum, you've got Helsingborg and AFC Eskilstuna, who I'm not even going to read the list in and out because it's just too long in both instances. But I mean, a couple of names that stand out: Anders Lindegaard, the goalkeeper, coming from Burnley to Helsingborg, and for AFC Eskilstuna, I know the Japanese guy Soya Takahashi could be an intriguing prospect, John.
You do like a bit of mischief, don't you, Steve? Because I think you know full well that I specifically said do not ask me about that player. Because I haven't a clue.
Lindegaard. I mean, Helsingborg, do you look at them and did they need to bring in as many players as they have done? I mean, there's a lot of free transfers and loans coming into the club. Did they need to reinforce?
I think that's the Henrik Larsson effect. They've, he's come in and he's probably looked at the squad and he's decided that he wants to jig things up a bit. We've lost Rasmus Jonsson, who weirdly enough has gone to Thailand, the Swedish forward. He's only 29, but he got maybe, I know they pay quite well in parts of the world like Thailand, but he's moved out there, and I think Larsson came in and they really needed a striker. He went on record and said that they wanted to pick someone up. They've looked around. Giro's an interesting signing. He's got league experience of Allsvenskan. Some of the players I don't know too much about. I think Tashreeq Matthews is one at Dortmund who's meant to be highly rated. But he's only 18 years old, so you can't ask too much from him at such an early stage. Lindegaard, I was really shocked by. I didn't see that one coming, but maybe the Man United factor there. Obviously, Henrik Larsson having spent some time on loan at Manchester United. I think Lindegaard was part of that squad at the time, the 35-year-old. And Tobias Mikkelsen, who's come from Australia, the Dane. So slightly random transfers, but obviously they've been quite busy. I think they do need a bit of a rejig. I'll be honest. I think they've been a little bit of a stale team, and I think they needed an injection of fresh blood, maybe just to help them on their way. But I do think they've lost a couple of players that could have been used for them.
I mean, it sounds like Helsingborg, it was probably needed, a fresh impetus in the transfer market. In the case of AFC Eskilstuna, does it reek more of panic with the amount of players that keep coming in and out of this club? And I do believe there's been another story involved with AFC Eskilstuna recently, John, which you want to talk about.
Yeah, a well-respected publication in Sweden has come out in the last week and talked about accusations of bullying from the club management towards the players. Players have come out anonymously, stating that things like, I think one of them said that his dad was insulted by the club manager. Apparently he used to pin players to the wall and slap them in the face, and pretty serious accusations of abuse, to be honest. And it reminds me of what happened with Bruma Poikina last season. There was a lot of accusations which led to the departure of several members of club staff after players came out and accused the manager at the time of all kinds of abuse, to be honest. Seems like a similar thing this leak. I don't know exactly the accuracy of it. It's hard to comment. But yeah, there's been a lot of accusations, and doesn't bode well for AFC Eskilstuna, because obviously that's the last thing you want, isn't it, when you're in a relegation battle, is your manager being accused of all kinds of nastiness.
So what exactly has been said in the media about AFC Eskilstuna then, John?
Well, there's some fantastic quotes, I'll be honest, in the accusations. It's quite a big scandal. I mean, if you liken this to England or another league, it's kind of like a revolt at a club like Huddersfield, or a revolt at a club like maybe Leeds or someone like that in the lower league. It is a big thing, to be honest. I know AFC are not a massive club, but players have been testifying on record about bullying at the club. So I'll read you out some of their comments that have been said. I mean, amongst other things, it was accused that the manager Nemanja Miljanovic told a player's dad that he is a shitty boot a piece of shit on a boot. That is one of the comments. He told another player that you are only at this football club as a charity case, and if you don't sort yourself out, you'll be right back to where you began. There's accusations of blackmail against employees. There's accusations of bullying, as I've said, of physical abuse, pinning players against the wall. What I found quite funny about it was the comments from Miljanovic himself. He was asked about it afterwards, and some of his comments were just very, very funny. It's like going up in court or something like that. And he was asked, for example, how do you feel about being accused of calling someone a piece of shit on a boot? And he said, I categorically did not say that. He claims that he did make some comments about a player being a charity case. So he said, all I was trying to say was that if the player did not like where he was, he does not like the club, then he can go back to where he was before. So yes, it's really blown up in the media, and there's been a lot of accusations, as I've said. So not so nice, obviously, if you're in the middle of it, and it seems like a lot of the players are really taking this quite seriously in terms of their accusations of bullying. So it will rumble on, but it's not helpful for the club when they're trying to avoid relegation, is it?
It certainly doesn't help them. And I mean, what do you think the fans think about this? I mean, actually, sorry, daft question. They don't have any fans, do they? So, but
well, I think comments like "I've helped you out more than your dad."
dear. I mean, it's.
I mean,
how can they survive? Can they stay up with an attitude like that within the squad?
I mean, I'm reading some of these comments. You know, you drag down the mood. If you don't want to be here, then please leave. You know, I've helped you more than you. I've helped you more than your dad, which is that's I'm like, there's some comment, isn't it? Really, I mean, the player actually came out and said he's never even met my dad. So,
the fantastic goings on at AFC Eskilstuna.
You shouldn't really laugh, but you know, some of the comments are just wildly bizarre, and I think in a way the bizarreness of it actually lends to its credibility, because you know you're not going to make up something like that, really, are you? And Miljanovic, he's definitely wobbling in some of his comments, trying to defend himself. So you know, like I say, there's a serious element to this. You know, then this is being investigated by the league, and there will be consequences for anyone found guilty, certainly. So he's up against it, really. But yeah, they're in big trouble, I think, and that's not a positive sign. Probably a positive sign for the likes of Falkenberg, Gifsons, and Kalmar, though, who are trying to compete with them to stay in the league.
A lot of different players coming into the club at AFC Eskilstuna, and I did mention Soya Takahashi. I mean, this is a guy who's recently been playing in the Asian Champions League, so quite a decent level for this Japanese left back, right back. It seems like he can play in midfield as well. Might be a bit of an unknown quantity, but there's always an air of randomness, isn't there, about AFC's transfer business?
Well, that's the thing is, I mean, it's an entire squad of unknown quantities. In fact, you could argue it's a complete league you could argue it's a complete club of unknown quantities, to be honest. That's my beef with them, really. You know, I never know what to get. I said it on a previous podcast. Their transfer business, to me, just reeks of agent activities. You know, recommendations, mates of mates. You know, all right, this player's come from the Asian Champions League, but you know, who are you telling me scouted him from AFC Eskilstuna? You know, do they have I don't think they have a scouting infrastructure that covers, you know, the Middle East, does it? Or Japan?
Well, I'd be surprised.
Very much doubts it with their you know, income. So, like I say, it just reeks of kind of agent recommendations, and all right, you might get one or two of them correct, but you know, I'm always more in favour of a bit more of a robust scouting system, I'll be honest. So yeah, I mean, they've brought a quartet of players in. Soya Takahashi, Dmitry Zuravlev, Michael Anaba, and Pontus Rodin. Never heard of any of them in my life. You know, one of them's come from Linköping City in Division 3. One of them's come from, again, Division 3. One's come from Spain, and one's come from, like you say, you know, the Asian Champions League. You know, I've said it before, really, with AFC. I think they're a bit of a strange club all round, and these accusations that have come out in the media are obviously, you know, a cloud that's going to be over them.
We'll talk about another team down there in a minute, that's Kalmar, but just before we go to them, BK Häcken recently lost Alexander Jeremejeff for €1 million to Dinamo Dresden. They already lost Mohamed Nasiru. I think we talked about him in a recent podcast. Signed Gustav Nielsen up front from Danish club Viella. But just briefly, how important is the Jeremejeff loss for Häcken?
Yeah, a big loss. Yeah, a very big loss. I think they're going to really, I think they're going to miss him, just from the point of view of, you know, Jeremejeff is a very good player, number 9. You know, a good target man. He gets goals. I think he's their top goal scorer this season. And just in general, you know, he's got 12 goals and assists in total this season. I think he will be missed. He was missed in their Europa League game, obviously, when they failed to register him. And I feel like he will be missed again going forward. I don't know too much about his replacement, but yeah, you know, Häcken have been really, really good going forward this season. They're one of the top goal-scoring teams in the league. So this is a blow. Dresden is, a lot of players are going to the sort of German second division, and I think it's a positive move for him. And they've obviously paid the money. I think they've got good values, to be honest, because I do think he's earned his move, if I'm honest. But yeah, obviously he was previously at Malmo, and he's really thrived at Häcken and gone on.
Okay, well, let's talk about Kalmar now, because we had a couple of listener questions from about them, and that's Warson, who at Oscar Hult 1991 on Twitter. Thanks for your questions. What do you know about Geir-Andre Herum, who just signed to Kalmar from Bodø Glimt? I'll talk about him in a minute. And also a question to you, John. The last few days in the transfer window, Kalmar brought in 3 players to the team. Is that enough to save them from relegation? So let's go through a list of players that have come in. Herum has recently arrived. They've got Alexander Jakobsen from Norrköping on loan. Jesper Mans, a right back from Elfsborg. Samuel Adrian on loan from Malmo. A couple of guys returned back from loan spells to the club. Leaving Kalmar, Chima Akas. I know he was quite an important player to Belenenses in Portugal, and a few loans have gone out of the club, along with Mustafa El Kabir. So Kalmar then, John. I mean, first question there: do you think they've done enough here to survive relegation?
Well, we shall see. I mean, I think one thing that's clear is they did need a striker. Their top goal scorer has 3 goals, the lowest of any team in the league in terms of top goal scorers. With, I think it's Niels Froling. That's not enough really for your top scorer with just 3. So they really do need sort of attacking reinforcements. I'm a fan of some of the signings. I think Jesper Mans at one point, he was quite decent at Elfsborg. But Chima Akas, I'm not sure how much they'll miss him. I think at times I saw him, and he did quite well. But at times, I think, they seem fairly happy for him to go, to be honest. So he's got his move to Portugal with Belenenses. But the other players, I don't know too much about. You're going to tell me and the listeners about Herum, who's their main kind of recruit, really, aren't you?
I've got to be honest, I don't think it's a very good signing for them. I mean, this is a guy he's been scoring goals for Bodø Glimt this season, but he's not always been a mainstay in the team, and rarely would he last 90 minutes. I think a lot of the goals that he scored there have been as a result of their playmakers, Håkon Evin and Amol Laguni. So he's had a lot of chances handed to him on a plate. And from what I know of Kalmar, they're not really known for creating that many opportunities, are they? So unless he's getting a lot of great service, then I just think he might struggle. He's quite a lightweight player in terms of physical presence up there, but he's got reasonable pace and suggestions of skill at times, but he isn't probably as clinical with chances as you'd want him to be. I do wish him the very best, but from what I've seen of Geir-Andre Herum, I just don't think he's going to be a success in the Allsvenskan, sadly.
I mean, I think it is a bit relative. So one thing I would ask you is, relative success for Kalmar would be 5 goals in the league. I mean, can he score more than the 3 goals that their top goal scorer has, or are you saying he's not going to score any goals?
He can be an upgrade, can't? Yeah, I think he is. It sounds like they've got an absolute. They've just obviously they haven't got the strikers that have scored them goals, so you'd hope by a sheer default he can be an improvement there. But the Allsvenskan, I think, is still a slightly better league than Eliteserien as an overall whole. I think there's more strong teams overall in that league, and I just worry that he's gone to a club. It's like going to the Premier League with Huddersfield or Palace, isn't it? There's not many goals. Usually, not many chances created, is there? It's not known for scoring goals, so he's going to have to make the most of his chances. And he just doesn't strike to me as a clinical sort of player. He's a sort of striker who needs about 2, 3, 4 opportunities to get his goal. I mean, is that going to really happen at Kalmar?
Okay, well, that answers the question that we had from a listener, so thank you for your question there. One thing I wanted to point out, actually, before we move on, is on the goal scorers thing there. Interestingly enough, out of every team in the Allsvenskan, 25% of the teams in the league have lost their top goal scorer who have been transferred out of the league. It's quite interesting, isn't it? Really, a quarter of the league have lost their top scorer. So it's a clear message, really. If you're playing in the Swedish top division and you're the top goal scorer of your team, there's a pretty good chance you're gonna get a move.
Yeah, nice place to get yourself in the shop window, isn't it?
It really is.
All right, well, I think that pretty much covers everything in this particular episode. Sorry we didn't really have much chance to talk about any Norwegian issues domestically anyway. We are midway through the transfer window in the E13, and I'm sure we will have a podcast towards the end of the month, start of September, where we do recap on that window over there in Norway. So, well, that's pretty much it. Remember, give us a follow on Twitter at NordicFootPod. Send in some questions to us whenever you want to. We do our best to answer them. Sorry we couldn't quite get a mention of all the questions that were tweeted into us this week, especially Norwegian fantasy, stuff like that. But we'll do our very best in the next episode. So keep listening to us. Thanks very much for your company, and we'll see you again very soon. Goodbye.